Finance too.
We've seen so far are pretty significant, and that not only in Texas and the Barnett and Woodford in Oklahoma, and you know, in Colorado with some of the tight sands out there, and obviously in Pennsylvania where I'm from. So I do want to mention that. I also want to mention he does, in addition to talking about the perspective of Professor Ingraffia, does mention Don Siegel, who's up in Syracuse. He's a hydrologist who has a very different view on one, the communication, this notion of communication between groundwater, drinking water, and fracture stimulations, but also on the issue of methane migration. Because you know, I'm actually from Northeast PA, near the town of Dimmock, where that's gotten a lot of attention. As a kid, we had a private water well, and it was absolutely possible to light the methane, to light your faucet on fire. We then got connected to a public water system, and that wasn't ever an issue anymore. But shallow methane's been an issue for a long time in our area. I imagine it's the same way in the southern interior of New York. There are a couple stories I've seen in the Binghamton paper up there over the past several years where you've had people lighting faucets on fire with no drilling activity anywhere around. I'm not, which isn't to say, I'm not going to sit here and say that it's never been the case in the history of oil and gas development in the world that a mistake hasn't been made, a human error, an issue with casing or some sort of issue with cementing, such that it didn't maybe exacerbate a problem that was maybe already there and sort of naturally occurring. I will say though that it is important to sort of, if we're going to think about how to regulate the industry, think about ways to strengthen or make it more significant the reach of government to this area, which should be sort of supported by the science. And that's something that Don Siegel's been trying to do up in Syracuse, and to your credit, Ben, you do mention his perspective as well. And the other thing I just would quickly mention is the idea of this being a significant resource, and Ben has mentioned this as well. In Pennsylvania, we're dealing with a situation here in the Marcellus. I mean, according to some geologists, 500 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. According to one analysis, by 2020, we could be producing 13.5 billion cubic feet of natural gas a day in Pennsylvania, which is 27 times more than we produce right now in that state. So it's a significant resource. People will talk to you about how clean it is, and it's true it is. It burns 50% cleaner than coal, 30% cleaner than oil. We're talking again about something that can be used not only for transportation fuel, but for electricity. And New York is a good example. New York, there's a pretty active debate happening right now, but we're talking about a state that uses between 27 and 32% of its natural gas. I'm sorry, if its electricity comes from coal. In Pennsylvania, we're about 8%, so we're a little bit behind on that. But really, natural gas is that fuel that sort of could do it all and across all sectors. And of course, we know about the industrial uses. This table, this microphone, these clothes, it's all sort of methane. Methane is used for that, and both as a feedstock and as an energy source. So again, I just wanted to sort of comment on that. I think I mentioned a couple things that we would quibble with that might require a bit more perspective. I think, again, we mentioned the idea that hydraulic fissures connecting with groundwater. I think it's important to understand that, we're talking essentially about this idea that that water that exists, and it's important to understand there's the groundwater at maybe 500 feet, but there's water that exists at 7,000 feet as well. It's salty. There's brine. And the issue there is if we're talking about the communication of that section to this section, not only would you see chemicals in the water, but you'd also see salt, and we haven't seen that at all. And frankly, I mean, you sort of look at what the EPA has said on this matter, and the Department of Environmental Protection in Pennsylvania, they've been fairly categorical on that point, that there hasn't been any sort of issue there. I would say the other thing I just want to mention quickly, the only two options that were presented in the paper as means for disposing of the water, and by the way, I think you're right to identify the disposal of the water, the produced water, as an issue that it represents a significant challenge. And frankly, two and a half years ago, we didn't have as great answers as we did now on that issue, on that question. But in Pennsylvania, we don't use injection wells. We don't have the subsurface geology for it, and they're not going to use them in New York as well. Plus the injection wells, the areas where we would otherwise be eligible for that, we actually use that to store natural gas. And so we can't do the injection wells in Pennsylvania. The other option for us really the only option, frankly, and something that we've been trying to do, and now up to about 60–70% of the water we're doing it with is recycling. That really hasn't been mentioned in this conference, but all the big operators in Pennsylvania are recycling 100% of their water right now. Take it from the produced water comes up, they take it right from the wellhead, we centralize it, add some fresh water to that, and continue on. And so that's the goal, and that's not only a saver in terms of costs associated with the process, but it's a saver in terms of the water being able to be used, the need to withdraw it, and all of our operators are looking at different ways, whether it's looking at mine water, whether it's looking at other sources. That's something that's on everyone's mind. But fewer truck trips and all that. I mean, so it's all, the water issue is an important one, and it's one that 2.5 years ago folks were sort of scratching their head on. Today they're actively involved in the recycling process, and that's growing more and more every day. So I think it's an important thing. The other thing, just quickly, on the water withdrawal that Tom mentioned in Pennsylvania, in Pennsylvania during drought conditions, once a drought's declared, once anything of that sort's done, Pennsylvania can shut that right down. And as part of the permitting process, you have to tell where's the water coming from, what's the level here, what's the level there. All that stuff's sort of done in the permitting process. I think it's an important thing. You absolutely have to know where your water's coming from. You have to know that you're not going to be depleting existing surface areas, and you have to do that in the right way. So we've done that in Pennsylvania, and I imagine it's sort of a common sense thing that would be done up here as well. So I don't want to take too much more time. I think I'm over. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to come up.
Jarrett is President and CEO of Citizens for Pennsylvania's Future, PennFuture. She is also the chair of the Board of Directors of the State Environmental Leadership Program, which is a national network of state-based environmental advocacy organizations. She is a native of Pennsylvania and has a Bachelor of Social Sciences from Penn State.
Good morning, I'm Jarrett, and I'm bringing you greetings from sort of ground zero of the Marcellus Shale Rush, or the Marcellus, or the shale plays, which is the Marcellus Shale. It's essentially the mother of all of the shale plays. It's huge, it's rich, and it's located very close to the markets which it's going to serve, which makes it an incredibly attractive place for gas drivers to come, and come they have. I'd like to commend the Munk School and the organizers of this forum for having it, because it would have been very useful for us in Pennsylvania to have had the opportunity to consider these issues before these issues just kind of rolled in like a tidal wave on top of us. There's a couple of reasons why that happened. We've had for more than 50 years a traditional gas industry, natural gas industry in Pennsylvania, drilling in shallow formations. And our regulatory regime was written to address that kind of drilling. What regulators did not understand, and it didn't really dawn on people until the last several years, was the fundamental difference in character of the shale gas technologies that are required to do that, the whole fracking thing. The other thing that we did not understand at all, and we're still trying to get our hands around, is just the sheer scale of what's going to happen in Pennsylvania in terms of the development of this particular resource that we have. I was looking down over the recommendations, and one thing, the recommendations of the paper, and one thing that struck me was those, despite our experience in the last couple of years, and despite of some progress that we've made in Pennsylvania towards getting a regulatory regime in place which specifically can address this industry, most of those recommendations still apply to Pennsylvania. There are some things that we've improved rather imperfectly, and there are many issues out there, including the water withdrawal thing, which we've got some sort of a handle on, although it's quite fragmented in the way it's regulated in Pennsylvania. We still have a long way to go.